Hello and welcome back to Listen Up Startups. I'm your host, Ashley Collins, CEO and founder of Humane Startup. Joining me here today is Kevin Brent of BizSmart, and he is wanting to chat with us about casting a vision, which is one of our pillars for a bold new world of business, a humane business ecosystem. So Kevin, I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself, about what you do, and what set you on this path to profit for purpose?
Okay, yeah, brilliant. So we support business owners in helping them to scale up. So we'll typically work with business owners with between 5 and 50 employees typically, and it's all around helping business owners to scale up. And I guess the purpose, the thing that really struck me at the beginning when we were looking to set up the business was that only around about 4% of businesses scale beyond 10 employees and less than 1% beyond the 50 mark. So we were quite interested as to what's the reasons behind that. Is that because 96% of people who start businesses don't want to scale at all, really? Or is it because, in fact, there's some things in there that they're struggling to overcome, some barriers that they're struggling to overcome? So that's what we're about. That's what drives us. We want to try and move the needles on those dials and help to create more scale-ups.
Wonderful. And it's interesting that you mentioned wanting to ask the question of like, why don't folks scale? I have my own thoughts on that and have done some research myself, but curious when your experience with your customers, is there a trend that you've been able to unearth in terms of what prevents people from taking that next step?
Yeah, I think there's a number of factors, and clearly one of those is desire. We kind of bundle that together, desire and confidence, but not all of us want to. It's fine. We might want to set up a business and be a solopreneur, and that's great. But equally, we might have got to the point where maybe we've got a bit of a business working quite nicely. We've got a few employees, but now we're tearing our hair out and we're wondering, how on earth do I keep control of this? And if I was any bigger, it wouldn't work. And maybe 1 month we seem to have some money, the next month we don't, and I'm working harder and harder, spending more and more time in the business, and the employee that I was just relying on has just handed in their notice, or they're not performing in the way that I want to, and we suddenly start to get all of these challenges that maybe we weren't expecting.
Right. And do you find as well that there are commonalities for why folks that maybe have the desire to do it haven't taken that step? Like, what's usually the biggest obstacle that folks need to overcome when it's time to scale?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the stages that you get to. So we look at the first thing actually for people thinking about scaling is to think about it as a journey, as a series of stepping stones, and not just a growth curve. Yeah. Because actually there's milestones, there's stepping stones that we all need to go through if we're going to scale. Certainly if we're going to build the kind of business that's got people in it, and it's not just maybe we're not the next Kim Kardashian or something, but right. But it's a business with people, product, service within it, and we look at that largely in terms of the people. And when we start up a business and we think, okay, how am I going to make this work for myself, perhaps? And that's great, and we can build a really nice little business, and maybe even a very profitable business as a one person, maybe a consultant or something like that. But the next stepping stone, if we wanted to get there, would be when we've maybe got a team of four or five people, and that's kind of like that next stepping stone. And of course, the business, to operate with 4 or 5 people, has to operate quite differently from if it was just set up for being one. So we have to think about it as to what, before we get there, to recognize that the business has to look like this when I get there. So what have I got to think about between now and then to make that happen? And then when I get there, maybe I pause and reflect and make sure that I'm making the business as efficient and profitable as possible before I take the transition to the next stepping stone, which is typically when we've got about 10 to 12 people in there. And that's about the limit that we can get to with a leader follower model, where we're the founder and we're driving everything, and we've got a team of people team of doers, of followers. That's about the limit that typically we can get to, because then that next stepping stone, which is quite a big jump, and we can talk about that if you like, is then when we have to put in a senior leadership team behind us and create other leaders, and we're then probably looking at 20, 25 people within the business, and that's a big jump. But seeing the business as those stepping stones, and consciously thinking about what it takes to go from here to there, what's different about when I'm there, and what do I need to do in between.
Yeah, and I would love to talk, and thank you for that. And I would like to spend some time with that next step, because it's interesting in my entrepreneurial adventures. We were basically a team of rebels that broke free from Monster in 2012 to co-found our first company, and our founding team was 5 people strong. So
right.
we did bootstrap and exit that company in 18 months, which was a journey.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. But, I think because we had the connections that we had a pretty healthy angel round, and
yes.
we just kind of went full steam from there. So we sort of bypassed that whole, leader follow model, which, I don't know if I'd recommend throwing yourself into that pot your very first time, but it is what it is. So I'd love to get your insight, having worked with a broad range of folks at various different stages. Have you seen anybody who's been crazy enough to go that route? And then when you make that jump, like, what are the common pitfalls there, things you need to look out for?
Yeah, I would think that's really interesting that you say that, and that there are a lot of, essentially something like 3/4 of businesses actually are solopreneurs, and it's that. It is that is a big thing, getting to those first sort of 4 or 5 people, and if you can imagine getting there and you've got yourself a team of people, your chances of succeeding from there are probably reasonably high. If you've got a decent business model and you've got they're good people, you've got all of those creative minds, you've got people that can support each other, can really drive the business forward. But if we're starting on our own and we're taking it, and maybe we've just put a little bit of savings behind us that will maybe last us for a year or something like that, and we're maybe trying to put a new type of business together, different, maybe not been done before, or we're trying to do something a little bit different and prove a different model, that's such a difficult thing to get out of, to make that, to be able to make enough money early on to be able to afford to hire some people or even to outsource, so that we can free our time up to be able to focus on building the business. It's almost like an owner's trap that we get ourselves into, where we just get sucked into doing the do, and we're just about surviving by doing it, but we can't spend any extra money or spend any extra time in thinking about hiring those people. So if you can work out how you can make that transition before you start. So maybe you can get angel investment, or brilliant, and that might enable you to recruit ahead and then work it through. But that does have its own challenges, as you were hinting at. Or maybe we can think about the business model right from the start. That means that we're not working too much in the business on delivering it, and that we can make enough margin, enough profit to be able to, as soon as we start to prove the business model, that it is self-funding right from the start. But if we just think about how do we, if we only go about it in the way of how do I make it so that I make enough money to pay my bills, the chances are we're going to really struggle to get any further than that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it definitely can speak to that. It's from personal experience, done things a couple of different ways, sort of this really intense bootstrapping, and then that co-founding team got back together a second time, and we did take on more investment that time.
Right.
From jump, there were some very strong opinions across the team in terms of VC funding, and we decided that wasn't a path that we were open to taking, strictly because control was important. Control of the technology was important, to the extended team. But when it comes to figuring that out, in terms of how you find that path to profitability so that you can scale. I'm a big proponent of alternative funding and getting creative there to release some of that pressure where possible. And so it'd be interesting to hear from your experience, like what are some of the creative things that folks have done to provide that financial cushion so that they aren't as easily hooked by short-term decisions that put the long-term mission at risk.
Yeah, that is a key thing. It's that thinking ahead from the value perspective, isn't it? So I don't think there's any one real magic bullet. I wish there was. It'd be great to be able to, here you are. This is the magic tip for everybody to overcome all of your problems. It's not like that, but it is about thinking creatively, but also with that, as you say, with the value in mind. So how are we going to create value, and what's a big, how are we going to make sure that we've early on, if we're going to try and bootstrap it, for example, and build it from our own funds, how do we build a model that's maybe got a recurring revenue element to it, so that it's not ad hoc and we're just going from the one project to the next and having all of these troughs in between, but we've got that consistent base of recurring revenue. But then, yes, think about the money. Often we don't have enough money put aside, or enough money. We don't think about the reserve side of things and go into it with our eyes open enough from that aspect. So where is that going to come from? Maybe you've got the typical roots of the family and friends, aren't they, to start with, as that side of things, and then maybe, as you say, an angel investor. But there are other sources, and we see quite a lot of interesting things, don't we, on crowdfunding and different ways of raising money for those sort of projects. But for my money, it comes down to that strategic thinking at the beginning as to what is our positioning, both from the markets that we're going into, but then within those markets, how are we going to create a competitive advantage so that we can have a strong, whether it's with our strong offer position, that means that that our product or service is so much better than the competition, or maybe we've got a cost advantage. But the more we can think about that and actually have that as a very strong model, then the more chance that we're going to build value in the long term, rather than just creating a bit of short term profit.
Yeah, and I talk a lot with folks who are, I think, answering the question for themselves about whether or not they want to take on the journey to being a founder. Maybe they've got a solid idea, a solid product, or they're experts in their industry and trying to think about maybe setting up like a services firm, things along those lines. And I think not all of these folks have a nest egg that they can use to get that initial self-funding off the ground. And so there's sort of this almost like a chicken and egg situation a lot of times, in terms of how do I get that initial MVP? How do I get the structure in that shows that I've got a method or a service that is deliverable and provides value. And it can be challenging to know when to take that step. And do you work with folks who are in that space and sort of trying to pre-build in what that next phase to scaling should be?
So yes, we do. We don't typically work with absolute startups. No. What we generally would do is work with businesses that have already got a little bit of a track record, maybe a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, something like that. So we're then coming in with them and helping them to maybe unlock the business model, the potential that they've got, rather than starting from a blank sheet of paper. And then it does It does. We've worked with businesses where we have then been able to help them to get investment from a venture capital company, in particular, but also a couple of business angels. But we've helped them then to be able to prove that business model that they've got, and maybe tweak that a little bit so that there's a bit more of a focus on the long-term value and how we're really going to create that value, rather than necessarily starting from that blank piece of paper. I think if you're starting from scratch, I mean, we all hear about the huge success stories of somebody that's come up with the next Facebook or whatever. We hear about those. It is really difficult to get investment if you've never had a proven model. You said your group got back together again. Well, you've got to track history then. So if you had wanted to raise more, I think you said you didn't so much, but if you had wanted to go to VC, you'd have had more chance of getting it the second time around than the first time. Yeah. So that first time around, finding somebody to invest in you is really, really tricky. So yes, if you can prove the model or get some funding to enable you to operate for a couple of years or something to be able to get that model, then that gives you more chance of getting in. You're also less likely to give away such a big chunk of your equity, of course, because if somebody is prepared to invest right at the beginning stage of an idea, then they're taking quite a big risk with their money, so they're going to want that return off of that. If you're looking to set up a service business or something, so if you've developed something that is totally unique, then yes, we might be talking about the VC sort of tight route from early on. But if you're thinking of developing a business and you would like to be an entrepreneur, you'd like to create a reasonably successful business, but you haven't got desires to be the next Bill Gates or somebody, then actually you could do worse than, and a lot of people just miss this, but you could think about the idea of taking on a franchise.
Yeah.
You might want to do it yourself, and certainly, you and I, and I'm sure a number of listeners would feel we're going to change the world, and there's something different that we don't like what else is out there, or we think we can do it better. But actually, quite often, there's some really good models out there that are already in play that you could then take on and mitigate quite a lot of that risk of that early stage. So, with us, for example, it took us, I'd say it took, we're a service business. I'd say it took us 7 years to really get the content together, the delivery model right, all of those things. And it's tough, and you've got to go into it with your eyes open and realize that you're probably not going to make the money that you think you might make straight away. I mean, yeah. I mean, I joke, I don't know whether the number's right, but I joke that it's always going to take 3 times as long as you thought it was going to take. It's going to cost you 3 times as much, and you'll make a third of but it could actually be worse numbers than that. It's probably more like a fifth, or whatever.
I think that's one of my favorite parts about the conversations that we have here on Listen Up Startups is the honesty that comes from folks who have charted this path. I think there is a really false narrative kicking around social media that, if you really want to be successful, that you have to start your own business. The path to autonomy is through being an entrepreneur. And it's obviously a decision that I made for a variety of reasons. But the reality is a lot of times you do make more money working for somebody else, and it's significantly less stress. And there's absolutely no shame in that if that makes you happy. it's all about, really what makes you happy. And I think that thing for me that pushed me into wanting to get out into solopreneurship after spending most of my career in HR technology was plugging the gap of support that I wish I had. So, we having navigated being part of a tech founding team 2 times, and then sort of naively thinking I could go work at a much lower rank for a company that had already closed out a Series B, which just didn't, I was putting my nose in all sorts of stuff that wasn't my business.
Right.
I wanted to support leadership well-being. I think when we started the first company, we all went into that quite naively, thinking like this is going to be great. We kind of fallen for the glamorized version of what it meant to be a U.S.-based tech startup, in the early noughties. It would have been phenomenal to have somebody preparing us for the mental fallout that comes after you exit. For helping you keep your relationships healthy as you navigate, being a founder. And I'd love to hear from you sort of what was that thing from you, that thing that you wanted to do differently to make these ecosystems better.
Yeah. But I think that's, I think you've just reminded me. I think that's a really, really important point for those of us that come out of a business. Maybe we've had a reasonably successful business career, and then we start up. That personal well-being is an interesting one, because if we've derived a lot of our self-credibility from the status, if you like, that we've got as a senior leader within business, and then we start up on our own, that can be quite a challenge. Normally, there's a period when it's fine, and you think, yes, you know what, I'm doing this for all these various reasons, whatever. But if you get a year down the line and you haven't really quite achieved what you wanted to do, setting your own business up, and you can no longer say, well, actually, I'm director of this multinational business or whatever, and it's a smaller affair. Then that can affect our own mental well-being. I think quite a lot. So one of the things that we advise business owners to do, and we run them ourselves, is to get involved in a mastermind group of some sort, so that you can go on this journey, if you like, with other business owners. And it's not all about I'm struggling and all of those things, but it's actually about learning from each other, from where we are at different stages of that scale up journey, and what we found, what somebody might have found that worked to address that particular challenge that I might be having at the minute, or equally something that didn't work. I think that's a key point that you've raised there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that there's been a bit of a running theme as we've opened up these conversations with entrepreneurs all across the world, and that is the importance of community, because it can be really lonely, especially if it's your first venture. A lot of folks do take that path from corporate out, and a lot of their network stays in corporate. And so there's, I think, oftentimes a lack of understanding of what you're going through, and you feel isolated. And you've now, if you do have a family, you've put some extra stressors on them from a financial standpoint. And it is just really great to surround yourself with folks who have been there and get it, and you can just run things by as a sanity check from time to time.
And also, you were talking about purpose and things like that. If you've set up a business just to make money, and you've got an idea to make money, then fine, you may be successful, you may not be. But equally, the moment things get a little bit tough, then you're probably going to struggle, and you may just throw the towel in or whatever. Whereas if you've really got a passion to achieve something, and that really is driving you what you're about, then when you've come across a challenge, whether it be something like global, like the pandemic, or whether it be a smaller, more local type challenge to your business, then it's much more likely that you're going to be able to hold on to that and go, okay, well, we've got a challenge at the minute, but I still fundamentally believe in what we're trying to achieve. So how do we turn things around at the moment then, so that we can still make progress towards that purpose that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that in your work with your clients, are you building in mechanisms to measure things that are not strictly profit-based in order to facilitate that connection to purpose and that connection to core values and the mission as you scale?
Yes, absolutely. It's a key part of it. In fact, we did some research, and a few interesting things came out of it, but one particularly on people. We asked, I think everybody, I suspect everybody listening, if we said, what's one of the most important assets in your business, they'd say their people, and they'd say, if we get it right with our people, then that's really what's going to drive the business forward. Is that fair enough? Would you say that, Ashley?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, when we asked people what their top 5 key performance indicators are across a number of businesses, we did a big piece of research. And we asked them what the top 5 key performance indicators are that they measure. Only 4% of them were proper people measures.
Yeah.
So just playing to the point that you've just made. So we absolutely encourage people, and I think you can. I don't want to get too much into detail of key performance indicators and things like that, but a lot of people, the easy ones to measure are the financial ones, and the ones that have a hard and fast number to them, and then we set those, and they are typically the financial type measures, and maybe some operational measures too. But we need to have a much more balanced view, and we look at a developing a balanced scorecard type approach with business owners, so that they're going, okay, yes, we do need some financial measures, but what about our people measures? What could we measure in there to know that our people are happy, they're working well, and that things are as they should be within our team, but also within our customers, and also in various other sectors. So we end up with that balanced set of measures, not just all one-sided on the financial.
I love that, and one of the things that I advocate for folks when one is an individual review, every 90 days, and to look at it sounds so negative, but it's like a concern map. I've got to come up with a new name for that, but a concern map across all of your life areas. So like realistically, how important is that area of life for you right now at the stage that you're at? And then how much attention and focus are you giving that area of your life? And I work within a framework of 12. I've seen them work anywhere from like 10 to 25 different life areas. But then you sort of calculate the delta, right? And then you prioritize based on the ones that are important that you're not giving enough focus to. And that's something that I highly recommend that folks go through at least every 90 days. I've been really encouraging people to, and this will look, how you assess this will look different for everybody, but adding a relationship health measurement. And I'm not talking just about like your personal relationships, but, I'm a big fan of Noam Wasserman's work. He wrote the book Founders Dilemmas. And, his research unearthed the fact that like 65% of startups actually fail because of relationship conflict across the founding team. And that then disseminates out. And so a lot of these other things that we quote as the reason that startups fold are just symptoms of tough conversations not being had, of personal stressors making their way into the business. But I've yet to sit down with a founder or a founding team that is already measuring relationship health as part of their scorecard. So I love that that's something that you are bringing into your work with your company.
So you mentioned the 90-day aspect, and that's a key component of what we talk through with businesses and get them to implement. In fact, it's a fundamental part of what we do, and essentially, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than this, but essentially, if every 90 days you sit down and you say, what does good look like at the end of the next 90 days, and how do we do against what we said we do for the previous 90 days, but what does good look like for that next 90 days? And if you make sure that within that you are including the people elements around it and various other things too, and then, so that gives you the company priorities every night. But if you're having a discussion at least with your senior leadership team, but ideally with everybody within the business every 90 days to set their own individual priorities or rocks, as we call them. And if people then bring into those their personal aspects, because, everybody used to say about this, the work and home divide. Well, it's not like that anymore. We don't come to work and it's not and have it completely separated from our personal life and then go home and we switch off completely from work. they're just, especially these days with remote working and doing things on Zoom, and they go together very much. So we've got to, if we're thinking about priorities for every 90 days, we can't just think about the business priorities. We've also got to think about the individual priorities, what's important to me as well over those next 90 days. And you mentioned the models and the different aspects. We bring in something that we encourage our founders to get their teams to do every 90 days, which is to look at eight key areas. As you say, you can. There are different models with different numbers, but we just simply look at family, relationships, career, health, money, personal growth, the fun, the social aspect of it, and also the physical environment. And if people just each 90 days just go, actually, you know what, I'm happy with that one and that one and that one, but that one, it's not, my personal health is not so great at the moment. So what am I going to do over the next 90 days that might help to improve my personal health? Doesn't have to be complicated, but at least we're then thinking about it and helping our teams to do that thinking as well.
Yeah. And I think it's such a powerful thing when it's one of my favorite expressions, and I use this with my kids all the time, but it's people do what you do, not what you say. And I think this is one of the pitfalls that leaders oftentimes step into. And it's the messaging is all there. The intention is all there. Prioritize your well-being, take your holidays, do all of these things. But then what your team actually sees you doing is burning the midnight oil and never taking a holiday and never setting an out of office. And so they're afraid to actually follow through with the things that are on offer. And for me, this is what it means to be vulnerable as a leader. It's not about oversharing, and it's not about if you are an emotional person, okay, great, bring that to the table. If you're not, you don't suddenly need to become mushy, but it's about transparency around the fact that we are all in fact human. We all have shifting priorities, and if you are willing to undergo that assessment process every 90 days and share some of that feedback, I found this area in my life where I wasn't paying as much attention to it as was proportionate to the value that it really has for me. So these are the adjustments that I made. Then that really emboldens folks to take those steps themselves. And you do see massive upticks in, all the research is there in terms of the positive impact that has on productivity and profitability.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Fundamentally, if we're talking about getting our teams to work as a really productive, effective, cohesive team, then, as you said, there's lots of research, and there's, for example, the Patrick Lencioni 5 dysfunctions of a team type model. But all of these, the foundation is that trust, isn't it? But it's called that kind of psychological safety, which is, do I feel able to admit when I've made a mistake or when I'm not actually 100% and I might need a bit of help without fear that that's going to somehow or other be held against me within the business. And it, as you say, it has to start from the top, because if the owner of the business is not prepared to admit when they make a mistake or that they are vulnerable in themselves, then how can you expect everybody else to? And then you've just not got that layer, that strength of trust at the bottom, that foundation from which to build then the other aspects that are important to build a cohesive team.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess I've got one final question for you, if you're game. But for those folks who maybe don't know if they have the desire to scale yet and are trying to figure that out, or maybe have identified that they have the desire but don't know if they've got what it takes to take that next step, what would your advice for them be?
Well, I think the advice that we tell everybody to do, if they want to make a big difference to their business, if they're not doing it already, is put in that 90-day planning, and back it up with a good weekly meeting where they're looking at where they're getting on against those 90 days, and bring other people into that process so that they're not just doing it on their own. So if they have got a team of people already, bring them into that 90-day planning process and involve them obviously in the weekly rhythm. If they're on their own in the business, if they're a solopreneur, find somebody else that you can involve in that. It could be a partner, a life partner, or it could be an associate that you're working with, or it could be somebody external from the business, but somebody that you trust that you can brainstorm around that. But then go back to really thinking about what it is that you're trying to achieve. What level of ambition have you got, and finding yourself, surrounding yourself with some good people. And I mentioned the mastermind type group, the peer groups, and working with them, because that will give you that inspiration as well as to whether you think, actually, you know what, I can see how they've achieved that, and that's something that I want to achieve as well. So I think that's probably a couple of the key things that I would say for now. I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but really thinking in that way and giving yourself the support from it, but defining what your level of ambition really is. You know, are you trying to change the world, or actually would you be quite happy with building a business with 3 or 4 people in it that's giving you the sort of lifestyle that you want?
Yeah, absolutely. Sound advice. And if folks like what they've heard today and they're interested in working with you to scale their organization, how can they get in touch?
Probably the best way is for them to go and have a look at our website, which is esusgroup.co.uk, and that's esusgroup.co.uk. And on that, there's a number of resources around scaling up, including the published book that we have called the Entrepreneurial Scaleup System, and I think that would be a good starting point.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time and valuable insight today. I know that the audience will get a lot of value from this conversation, so thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in again. For those of you who may also like some additional support on your well-being journey, please feel free to download the 7 Summits app, where you can get bite-sized sessions for behavioral therapy, really just a whole host of tools to help you upskill in the self-therapy department as you look to stay sane on your entrepreneurial adventures. The app is available in the Google and Apple stores and is completely free for all users. And if you have any questions navigating that, you can also reach out to me directly from our website, www.humanestartup.com. And I look forward to chatting with you all again next week.